What if the fairy tale you always believed in was never a true love story at all? What if instead it was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated performance, written like a script for flashing cameras, meticulously designed to dominate headlines and driven not by devotion or sacrifice, but by a hunger for ambition and power? Prince Harry was once celebrated as the world's most beloved royal rebel. He was the prince with a cheeky grin, the spark of mischievous charm, the boy who had lost his mother in one of the most public tragedies the modern world had ever seen, and who then grew up beneath the relentless and unforgiving glare of countless cameras. People adored him because he seemed real. He was not rigid and cold like so many royals often appeared to be. He laughed openly, he drank freely, he wore costumes that triggered waves of tabloid scandals. He felt like one of us, flawed, approachable, undeniably human. Before we continue, do not forget to press the like button, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. And then Meghan Markle appeared. The actress, the humanitarian, the woman who seemed for a shining moment to transform Harry's existence into a dazzling modern fairy tale. A royal prince choosing to marry a self-made star. Their wedding was broadcast around the globe and watched by millions upon millions, celebrated everywhere, as the grand union of tradition and modernity colliding in a single breathtaking event. The world was sold a powerful story, the story of love overcoming every obstacle, triumphing even over centuries of unbending royal convention. But fairy tales, as you already know, always hide shadows that linger quietly behind the dazzling glitter. The real question is just how deep did those shadows go, and how much darkness was concealed beneath the shimmering surface. Tonight, we step directly into a story that Prince Harry himself has finally dared to reveal. It is a story built on manipulation, on regret, on the painful truth for marriage, where one person allegedly did not seek the warmth of family, but instead chased the allure of fame. It is the story of a single life-altering decision that pulled Harry away from the only world he had ever truly known. A decision that, in his own words, he now describes as the greatest mistake of his entire existence. You have seen the bold headlines splashed across newspapers. You have witnessed the carefully staged photographs, the polished and practiced interviews, the endless stream of press releases proclaiming charity work, Hollywood opportunities, streaming contracts, and glamorous deals. Yet, what you have not been shown is what took place behind closed doors, hidden from the public eye. What you have not been told are Harry's own confessions, his personal words revealing how he was slowly pushed, cornered, and persuaded to abandon his royal birthright. And here lies the most shocking revelation of all. Harry now openly admits that Meghan chose the blinding spotlight instead of the sanctuary of their marriage. She chose fame over family cameras, over commitment, ambition over loyalty. But the question that echoes louder than any other is this: how could the prince, a man who once seemed so strong, so steadfast, so deeply loyal to the legacy of his heritage, allow himself to be swayed so completely? Why did he turn away from everything his late mother had fought so fiercely to preserve for him? And perhaps most haunting of all, what finally drove him to confess that the marriage the world had been shown was never truly what it seemed to be. This is not mere gossip whispered in passing. It is the slow but undeniable unravelling of one of the most powerful, most influential, and most enduring institutions on the planet, the British monarchy itself. And just as significant, it is also the unravelling of a man who now admits with painful honesty that he allowed love to blind him until it was already far too late to turn back. Picture this clearly. You are born into immense privilege, into a world steeped in centuries of unbroken tradition. Your name is written in the history books long before you are able to take your first steps. You grow into adulthood carrying the weight of duty serving in the military, where every salute and every uniform represents your grandmother, the Queen of England, standing tall on the global stage. And then, in only a few short years, all of it is gone. Your identity as a royal, stripped away your titles, revoked the respect you once commanded, tarnished, and the bonds with your family severed one by one. And why? Because of love, or at least what you believed with every fibre of your being was love. Now pause and ask yourself, with brutal honesty, if you were Prince Harry, would you have made that same choice? Would you have been willing to abandon everything, your honour, your heritage, your birthright, for the fragile promise of a brand new beginning, only to stand by helplessly as that promise shattered and collapsed into betrayal? This is the reason the story holds such weight today. It is not only about the monarchy or the politics of a royal household. It is about something far deeper, human vulnerability. It is about what happens when loyalty collides head-on with ambition, when love collides with fame and the desire for recognition. And above all else, it is about the universal truth that even the strongest, the wealthiest, the most powerful among us can be manipulated. Harry himself admits it openly. He confesses that he was persuaded, pushed, and ultimately convinced to abandon the royal life that had shaped him since birth. He reveals how Meghan whispered in his ear, urging him to believe that true freedom waited for him outside the palace walls, when in truth that so-called freedom delivered him straight into isolation. And when the cameras stopped flashing, when the lucrative deals began to fade, when the crushing reality of exile finally sank in Harry, was left with a single devastating realization. He had been played. But let us pause and rewind, because to truly understand Harry's confession, you must first understand the boy who grew into the man. Think back to the image, forever etched into the world's collective memory, a 12-year-old boy named Harry walking solemnly behind the coffin of his mother. The entire world wept with him. The cameras closed in mercilessly on his every step, capturing not only his silence, but his pain. That day was his first lesson, and it was brutal. He learned that his grief would never be private, that his sorrow would always belong to the public. And perhaps that very moment planted the seed of his lifelong vulnerability, a desperate, unending hunger for someone, anyone, to finally see him not as a prince bound by duty and expectation, but simply as a human being. Meghan recognised that need in him, or at the very least she gave every appearance of recognising it. She offered Harry comfort when he craved it most, attention when he felt overlooked, and affection when his life had been marked by loneliness and loss. She stepped seamlessly into the role of the woman who seemed to understand him in a way no one else ever had. And Harry, carrying the scars of lifelong trauma and desperate for a connection that felt genuine, believed her without hesitation. Yet, according to Harry's own admissions, what began as gentle comfort soon transformed into something very different. The tender encouragement he clung to gradually shifted into quiet but persistent pressure. The sweet promises that once felt like hope began to harden into sharp ultimatums. The question was no longer, "What do you need, Harry?" Instead it became, "When will you choose me over them?" A question that cut to the heart of his identity and demanded a loyalty that threatened everything he had ever known. The world, of course, did not see this unfolding at first. All the world saw was the glittering wedding spectacle, the radiant couple smiling for the cameras, and the precious image of a baby being cradled in royal arms. But behind that glossy picture, beneath the dazzling surface, Harry's life was being rewritten piece by piece. Step by step, choice by choice, Meghan was pulling him further and further away from the crown and the family that defined him. And Harry, blinded by what he believed with all his heart was true love, allowed it to happen without recognising the cost. But why choose to confess now? Why admit, after years of tirelessly defending Meghan, after sitting through countless interviews and high-profile documentaries, after severing ties with his own brother and distancing himself from his father, that he had in fact been manipulated? Why speak up only now after the marriage has unravelled and collapsed before the world's eyes? The answer is painfully simple, because regret does not always arrive immediately. Sometimes it takes years to break through the fog. Sometimes the truth does not fully strike until you have already lost everything you once held dear. And Harry, by his own admission, has reached that point. So here is the shocking claim that echoes throughout this story. Meghan chose the lure of fame over the strength of family. She chose the blinding glare of publicity over the sanctuary of privacy. She chose lucrative Hollywood contracts over the quiet peace of mind her husband longed for. And Harry, the man who once defended her against every critic, now declares this openly. But make no mistake, this is not a simple tale of villain and victim, of one person controlling and another merely suffering. No, this is a story thick with contradictions, tangled with choices that cut both ways. Harry was not only manipulated, he was also a willing participant. He enabled it. He stood by her side at every turn, shielding her from backlash. He pushed away his brother William, the one person who tried desperately to warn him. He dismissed the wise counsel of the Queen herself. He even turned his anger toward the press, the very same press Meghan craved attention and validation from. And does that contradiction not strike you as extraordinary? That a man who spent his life railing against cameras, who spoke so passionately of hating the spotlight, would marry a woman who could not seem to live without it? That paradox is at the very heart of this unravelling, and it is what makes Harry's confession both tragic and fascinating. And so, as we draw back the curtain on this unfolding saga, a clear and unsettling pattern begins to emerge. What appeared to the world as a sweeping love story was in truth never truly about love at all. It was about leverage. It was about how Meghan identified and seized upon Harry's deepest vulnerabilities, his unresolved trauma, his aching desire to be seen and understood. And it was about how Harry, blinded by hope and devotion, willingly surrendered his crown, his duty and his heritage in exchange for the promises she whispered, promises that in the end did not endure. By the time the streaming cameras from Netflix captured their polished narrative, by the time the highly publicised Oprah interview sent shockwaves across the globe, by the time the lucrative Spotify deal collapsed into public embarrassment, Harry was forced to confront a painful truth. In Meghan's carefully constructed world, he was not the leading man. He was not the husband at the heart of the story. He was merely a co-star, a convenient storyline, a supporting character in Meghan's relentless chase for relevance and recognition. And all the while, the world watched closely. The world dissected every detail, each glance, each stiff gesture, every telling silence. Now, as the dust of their marriage slowly settles, Harry has finally spoken his truth. He admits openly that he regrets leaving the royal family. He regrets giving up the honour, the identity, and the sense of belonging that had shaped him since birth. He regrets the ties he severed with his brother, his father, his grandmother, and with the crown itself. But most of all, he regrets the trust he placed in Meghan, when she convinced him that walking away was the only path to freedom, to happiness, to peace. For now, he knows the devastating reality that path led not to liberation, but to loss. But this is the moment where the story begins to take a far darker turn, because Meghan's ambition was never solely about leaving the palace walls behind. It went beyond the idea of escape. Her vision was about climbing higher, moving faster, and reaching further than she ever could have, while bound by the restrictions of being a working royal. And Harry was the golden ticket that made it all possible. Harry himself now admits this truth, a realization that came far too late. That is why this introduction matters so deeply. What you are about to hear is not just another chapter in the long line of royal scandals. It is the raw confession of a man who traded his legacy, his heritage, and the weight of centuries of tradition for what he believed was love, only to discover painfully that the love he sacrificed everything for was never as unconditional as he had imagined. And so I will leave you with this cliffhanger. The night Harry made the fateful choice to step back from his role as a senior royal. The night he sat down with Meghan, weighed the impossible options, and ultimately surrendered centuries of duty, was not some spontaneous gesture of romance. No, it was the product of steady, relentless pressure. Pressure that, by Harry's own account, had begun long before that night. And more importantly, it was not Meghan's first attempt to push him away from his royal roots. The question is, what exactly happened during that conversation? What words were spoken, and what did Meghan demand that finally tipped Harry past the point of no return? That right there is where our story truly begins. What truly happened? On the night Harry decided to step away from the only life he had ever known, was it a moment of sudden clarity, a final awakening, or was it instead the breaking point after months, perhaps even years, of quiet persuasion and subtle pressure building behind the scenes? To answer that question, we cannot begin with that night itself. Not yet. We must first go back to the very beginning, to the moment when the so-called fairy tale was first born. Because to truly understand Harry's confession, you must first see how the story was carefully sold to the world. You must understand how the glitter blinded everyone watching, including Harry himself. It all began like a scene written straight from a Hollywood film, quite literally. Meghan Markle was an actress working on the set of the television drama Suits a Series, built on sharp dialogue, stylish characters, and glamorous wardrobes. She was not yet a household name, but she was known in certain circles. She was ambitious, determined, and focused. She dreamed of recognition in Hollywood, of larger roles, of being seen on a global scale. Alongside her acting career, she carefully curated a polished lifestyle blog, arranged well-timed charity appearances, and shaped her public image as a compassionate humanitarian. Piece by piece, she was constructing a brand, one designed to carry her far beyond the television set. Then came the meeting, the introduction wrapped up and presented to the public as something almost magical in a blind date. At least that is how the story was packaged and fed to us. Meghan, the stunning actress with charm and poise. Harry, the playful prince with the mischievous grin. Two different worlds colliding as though by destiny. Two souls supposedly brought together by fate itself. How many times were we told this version of events? How many headlines proclaimed it? Love at first sight, they said. The stars had finally aligned. But how often do blind dates truly end in weddings? That is the question the glossy headlines never dared to ask. Here is the truth those carefully polished stories conveniently ignored. Meghan was not stepping into this encounter unaware. She was not walking into it blind. She had done her research. She had openly told friends that she wanted to date a British man, ideally someone famous, someone with status. So when the chance to meet Prince Harry finally appeared, she understood exactly what was at stake and what opportunities such a meeting could hold. Now, ask yourself honestly, was this the beginning of a love story, or was it the execution of a well-crafted strategy? Harry, on the other hand, was deeply vulnerable. He was still carrying the raw scars left by his mother's tragic death wounds that had never fully healed. He was still struggling to find his place within the rigid royal machine. He was not the heir, he was the spare. William carried the destiny, the crown, the responsibility. And Harry, what did he truly have? A life built on appearances, a life lived under constant and merciless scrutiny, a life where he was never truly free. And then Meghan entered. To Harry, she seemed to offer what he had been searching for his entire life. She offered an escape from the suffocating traditions. She offered warmth and attention. She offered what he believed was genuine understanding. Imagine being Harry at that moment, believing that here at last was a woman who did not see only the prince, the title, the duty, but who saw the man within. Or at least, that is what he thought. And the media, hungry for a story that felt fresh and electrifying, devoured it without question. The narrative was perfect. An American actress, divorced, biracial, a woman stepping into the very heart of Britain's oldest and most rigid institution. It was revolutionary. It was modern. It was a headline dream. Newspapers framed it as the new Diana moment, a spark of life and hope for a monarchy that had long been criticised as outdated. For a brief, glittering instant, it seemed as though the royal family was finally stepping into the 21st century in a way it never had before. But fairy tales, as history so often reminds us, usually conceal darker truths behind their polished surfaces. Even from the very beginning, there were whispers. Members of Meghan's staff on the set of Suits described her as demanding, particular, and at times ruthless in her determination to achieve exactly what she wanted. In Hollywood, such traits were hardly unusual, they were even expected. But inside the palace walls, where tradition, hierarchy and diplomacy ruled, every move, that same attitude, was a recipe for friction and conflict. And the warning signs, the red flags that fluttered early Harry, either did not see them or perhaps chose not to. Why? Because Harry was in love, or at least he was convinced he was. Do you remember their engagement interview, Harry sitting beside Meghan, clasping her hand, both of them smiling with a mixture of nerves and excitement, laughing at small jokes meant to charm the world? When asked how he had proposed, Harry shared a simple story about cooking roast chicken at home. It was casual, ordinary, romantic in its simplicity. Meghan beamed as though it was the sweetest tale she had ever heard. But if you listen carefully to that interview now, with the benefit of hindsight, details stand out. Listen to the tone of Harry's voice. Notice Meghan's interruptions, observe the subtle way she spoke over him, redirected his answers, and carefully steered the narrative. Was that disarming charm, or was it the early signs of quiet control? Then came the wedding, the moment that sealed the fairy tale in the eyes of the world. It was the 19th of May, 2018, at St George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. A spectacle broadcast across continents, viewed by millions upon millions of people. Meghan in a sleek Givenchy gown, Harry in his formal military uniform. The pews filled not only with royals, but with global celebrities, Oprah Winfrey, George Clooney, Serena Williams, and more. It was less the image of a royal wedding steeped in tradition, and more the staging of a Hollywood blockbuster, a fusion of monarchy and celebrity culture that captured global attention in a way no palace event ever had before. The world was enchanted by what it saw. To millions watching it was the image of pure romance, of unity, of a modern love story breaking free from the chains of centuries of rigid royal tradition. But behind the dazzling cameras, away from the carefully curated images, there was already tension brewing. Meghan allegedly clashed with Kate Middleton in the tense days leading up to the wedding. Reports from staff spoke of tears, of heated arguments over flower girl dresses, over protocol, over how certain details should unfold. Meghan wanted her way, uncompromising and firm. The palace, however, insisted on tradition. And Harry, torn between his new wife and the weight of his family's customs, chose Meghan's side every single time. This became his first true test of loyalty, and he made his position unmistakably clear. The press at that moment did not fully expose the conflict, but insiders whispered, and with each passing month, those whispers only grew louder, shaping into a chorus of warning. Here lies a contradiction that cannot be ignored. Meghan claimed she was entirely unprepared for royal life, that she did not understand its weight, that she was naive about the relentless pressure. Yet at the very same time, she was staging calculated photo opportunities, curating interviews with careful precision writing speeches to shape her narrative, and manoeuvring the global PR machine with remarkable skill. So which version was true? Was she genuinely overwhelmed and innocent, or was she shrewd, deliberate, and ambitious from the very beginning? The glittering fairy tale began to wobble almost as soon as the vows were spoken. Meghan's impatience became impossible to ignore. She did not want the slow, methodical path of a working royal, smiling, politely shaking. Countless hands opening schools, cutting ribbons, and quietly representing the Queen at state dinners. That was not enough. She craved more. She wanted impact headlines and recognition on a scale that would eclipse the royal mould. She wanted, as she is alleged to have said, to hit the ground running, and not at a gentle pace, but at full speed, leaving centuries of careful tradition stumbling in her wake. Harry, still wrapped tightly in the intoxicating glow of new love, still haunted by memories of what his mother had endured at the hands of the tabloids, felt a relentless need to protect Meghan at all costs. He became her shield, her defender, her voice against every perceived threat. He fought her battles as if they were his own. He brushed aside the concerns of his brother William, who urged caution. He ignored the wisdom of palace staff, who quietly advised patience. Again and again, Harry chose Meghan over everyone else, and he made that choice without hesitation. But here is the chilling truth. Each time he chose Meghan, it meant that step by step he was rejecting his own family. Think carefully about that. A man whose entire identity was tied to the monarchy, a man whose grandmother was the most revered monarch of modern history, began to distance himself from all of it, not because of scandal, not because of some external enemy, but because of love. Or was it something far more troubling, love, that was not entirely love but manipulation, carefully disguised as devotion? As the first year of their marriage unfolded, the warning signs multiplied. Meghan began pushing for complete independence from William and Kate, demanding that she and Harry separate their office entirely. She wanted her own staff, her own initiatives, her own platform carved out within the palace walls. The fairy tale, it turned out, was never about blending seamlessly into the royal structure. It was about standing apart, about creating a new centre of power and influence. And Harry, believing he was building a brighter future with Meghan, agreed to it all. He convinced himself that together they could strike a balance between royal duty and personal freedom. He defended her relentlessly against the press, so much so that he even issued a rare and emotional public statement condemning what he called media harassment. In his mind, he was protecting his wife. In reality, he was drawing himself further away from the family and the crown that had defined him since birth. But what the public never truly saw was the quiet, steady isolation taking root. Harry was drifting step by step, choice by choice, further away from William, further away from Charles, further away from the very institution that had defined every moment of his life since birth. And he was doing it all for Meghan. Here is the question you must ask yourself. Was Harry truly in control, or was he being carefully guided and led one subtle decision at a time, further and further from his roots? Fairy tales are meant to end with happily ever after, but this one was already showing cracks beneath the shine. The wedding may have dazzled as perfection. The engagement may have seemed magical, a dream unfolding in real time. But behind the grand curtain, the very first seeds of regret were already being sown. Seeds that, by Harry's own admission, he would not recognise until it was far too late. Because Meghan's first shocking demand, the demand that exposed where her true priorities lay, was about to surface. And it was not about love. It was not about family. It was about control. Control over their image, their direction, their role inside the monarchy. What she asked of Harry in that moment would mark the beginning of a long and irreversible chain of events. A chain that would eventually unravel their marriage and lead to Harry's devastating confession years later. But what exactly was that demand? And how could it drive Harry into direct conflict with the very crown he had once sworn with pride to serve? That is the turning point we now face. What exactly was Meghan's first shocking demand? What could have been so significant, so bold, that it caused Harry, a prince born into centuries of unshakable duty, to begin pulling away from the very institution that had defined him since the day he was born? It was not about money. It was not even about fame. Not in those early days. It was about something far deeper. It was about power. It was about control. It was about carving out influence within a palace, where power had always been carefully guarded, and where hierarchy ruled every action, every word, every tradition. So let us rewind to those first months of their marriage, the so-called honeymoon period. On the surface, it was bliss. The cameras captured nothing but radiant smiles. The press could not get enough of the sparkling fairy tale. To the world, it looked flawless. But behind closed doors, it was already becoming a battleground. Meghan wanted independence. From the very beginning, she made it clear, reportedly with no hesitation, that she would not play second fiddle to William and Kate. She did not want to be confined to the shadows of the royal machine, waiting her turn, staying in line, and obediently following protocols written long before she ever arrived on the scene. What Meghan wanted was her own office, her own staff, her own projects, her own empire within the monarchy itself. Now, pause and think about that for a moment. The monarchy was, and always has been, built on hierarchy. It is a structure where everyone has a place. At the top, the Queen. Next, Charles preparing to inherit the throne. William and Kate representing the future. And then Harry the spare, the one destined always to stand just outside the line of succession. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. But Meghan did not see it that way. She saw herself as equal to the rest, perhaps even superior in terms of charisma, influence, and marketability. She was not content with ribbon cuttings, handshakes, and polite speeches at state dinners. She wanted more. She wanted impact. And she wanted it immediately. Harry, still blinded by the intoxicating glow of new love, went along with every request. To him, Meghan's demands seemed perfectly reasonable. Why shouldn't she have her own office? Why shouldn't she have independence? Why should she be forced to wait quietly behind William and Kate, playing a supporting role instead of leading one? In Harry's eyes, her determination felt justified, even admirable. But here lies the contradiction that reveals far more than it first appears. Meghan claimed she did not truly understand the royal system, that she was overwhelmed by its rules and crushed by its complexity. And yet at the very same time, she was manoeuvring through that system with the precision of a skilled strategist. Does that not strike you as strange? How could someone who supposedly knew nothing about the monarchy suddenly know exactly how to carve out her own empire from within it? The first visible cracks appeared in the year 2019. That was when Harry and Meghan officially split from William and Kate's household. What had once been presented to the world as the Fab Four, the two brothers and their wives, united, disintegrated almost overnight. Meghan pushed hard for her and Harry to establish their own base of operations, their own staff, their own charitable foundation. And make no mistake, it was not merely about logistics, it was about identity. Meghan wanted to brand herself and Harry as separate as global figures in their own right, not just secondary players in the royal hierarchy. And Harry every time stood firmly by her side. He backed her when palace advisors raised concerns. He defended her when William questioned the wisdom of the move. He justified it all by insisting they only wanted to modernise the monarchy. But insiders whispered a very different truth. Meghan was not modernising anything. She was constructing her own platform, carefully laying the foundations of an empire that would stand apart from the crown itself. And the battles did not end there. Soon staff began to complain openly. Allegations surfaced of Meghan being difficult, dismissive, and relentlessly demanding. Stories spread of assistants left in tears of AIDS, resigning of Meghan, allegedly treating palace employees as though they were beneath her rather than trusted members of a household bound by duty. Defenders of Meghan were quick to label the criticism as racism, sexism, or cultural misunderstanding. But here is the uncomfortable question. Was it truly that simple? Or was it that Meghan was already running her royal life, as if it were a Hollywood production, set one where she was the star of the show, and everyone else was easily replaceable? Through every storm, Harry stood firmly by her side. He issued statements condemning the press. He accused journalists of cruelty and bias. He lashed out at critics, even when those critics came from within his own family. In his heart, he believed he was protecting his wife. But was he truly protecting her? Or was he enabling her? Because every demand Meghan made, Harry accepted without hesitation. Every boundary she pushed, Harry allowed to crumble. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he was stepping further and further away from the very institution he had once sworn loyalty to defend. Consider this moment. Meghan pressed for costly renovations to Frogmore Cottage, their royal residence funded by the public's taxes. She demanded extensive changes, upgrades, comforts, requests that sparked outrage and resentment among the public. The press called it extravagant, even wasteful. But Meghan insisted it was necessary, and Harry yet again defended her without question. Was that the act of a man in love, or was it the act of a man under control, mistaking manipulation for partnership? The most revealing moment, the one that insiders say left them stunned, came with a single remark Meghan allegedly made when asked about royal protocol. She dismissed it outright, saying, "I don't see why we can't do it our way." And there it was. The attitude, the demand, the quiet but unmistakable rebellion. Meghan was not there to adapt herself to the institution. She was there to rewrite it in her own image. Harry, the boy who had grown up with rules, traditions and protocols drilled into him from the moment he could walk, should have recognised this as dangerous. But he did not. Love, or what he thought was love, clouded his judgment. And this is precisely where manipulation proves most effective. Not in the form of dramatic ultimatums, but in small, subtle pressures. In gentle nudges disguised as support. In soft whispers that masquerade as encouragement. Meghan did not say, "Leave your family." Not yet. What she said instead was, "We deserve better. We deserve independence. We deserve control." And Harry, vulnerable and yearning to protect her, believed every word. Now pause and think about your own life. Have you ever been so deeply in love, so fiercely protective of someone that you ignored every warning sign, every red flag that should have stopped you in your tracks? That is what was happening to Harry. He was not simply choosing Meghan over the monarchy. He was choosing Meghan over himself, sacrificing his own identity, his own instincts, his own roots for the promises she placed before him. The palace was growing increasingly unsettled. William's frustration was becoming more visible. Advisers spoke cautiously but firmly, warning Harry about the dangers of the path he was taking. Even the Queen herself, the steady anchor of the monarchy, voiced concern over the pace at which Meghan was pushing boundaries. But Harry would not listen. To him, every criticism of Meghan was not advice, but an attack. Every warning sounded like jealousy. Every hesitation looked like betrayal. And here lies the bitter irony. The more the palace tried to protect him, the more convinced Harry became that they were his enemies. And so he clung even tighter to Meghan. Now, stop and ask yourself who truly benefited from this shift. Meghan walked away with independence, with greater visibility, with a distinct platform carved out for herself, and with a rising reputation as a global humanitarian. And Harry he was left with growing isolation, with distance from his brother, with tension and friction between himself and his grandmother, and with the creeping realization that he was standing at odds with the only world he had ever truly known. Is it not striking that the independence Meghan demanded for them both ended up leaving Harry more dependent on her than at any other time in his life? By the end of their very first year as a married couple, Meghan's demands had already reshaped Harry's entire role within the monarchy. He was no longer the carefree, mischievous, beloved prince the world adored. Instead, he had become the defensive and combative husband, constantly at war against the press, against his own family, against the weight of tradition. And every battle he fought, every bridge he set aflame, was done at Meghan's urging. Do you see the pattern beginning to take shape? The fairy tale was no longer about love. It had shifted into a story about power. And Meghan's next demand, the one bold enough to place her in direct conflict with the Queen herself, would prove it beyond doubt. Because Meghan was not satisfied with mere independence within the palace walls. She wanted something far greater. She wanted to redefine the monarchy itself. And Harry, swept up in her vision, was about to face the most dangerous choice of his life. But what exactly did Meghan ask that was so audacious it caused even the Queen to raise her voice? And why, when confronted with that demand, did Harry side with Meghan, even though it meant openly challenging the most powerful woman, Britain? The very figure who embodied centuries of stability and tradition. That is where the story leads us next. What happens when a Hollywood script collides with a 1,000-year-old monarchy? What happens when the rules of one of the world's most rigid institutions are defied by someone who believes those rules were never meant to apply to her? This is the turning point where the story takes a darker, more dangerous turn. Because Meghan was no longer asking for independence. She was escalating her ambitions into something far more explosive. She was, in essence, challenging the crown itself. And when you challenge the crown, you are not merely rejecting tradition, you are standing in defiance of the Queen. Let us set the stage. The Queen was 93 years old at the time. She was a woman who had devoted her entire life to upholding the monarchy and preserving its stability through wars, scandals, painful divorces, and personal tragedies. She had seen it all and had guided her family through storms that would have sunk almost any other institution. And now, in her twilight years, she was confronted with a new and unexpected crisis. He present. Her grandson and his wife wanted to rewrite the rules. The vision Meghan put forward appeared simple at first. On the surface, she and Harry sought to be half in, half out of royal life. They wanted to retain their royal titles, their privileges and their public status, while also earning private income, striking commercial deals and building a personal brand beyond the palace walls. It was unprecedented. It was unthinkable. To the Queen, it was unacceptable. Consider the logic for a moment. The monarchy endures because it is meant to stand above business, above celebrity, and above private ambition. Royals are expected to serve, not to sell. They represent the institution rather than themselves. If Meghan and Harry were permitted to carve out this hybrid role, it would set a precedent that could slowly unravel the carefully maintained fabric of the monarchy. The Queen knew this instinctively. William knew this. Charles knew this. But Harry did not see the danger. He saw only the vision Meghan presented of freedom. And so the battle lines were quietly drawn behind the heavy doors of the palace. Tensions rose, tempers simmered. Meghan reportedly brushed aside the Queen's concerns, dismissing royal protocol as outdated, irrelevant, and even insulting. She believed she and Harry could modernise the monarchy by reshaping it into a global celebrity platform, a fusion of royalty and Hollywood monarchy and media. But to the Queen, this was not modernisation. It was dismantling. It was destruction. Now imagine being Elizabeth II, a woman who had dedicated every single day of her long life to protecting the integrity of the crown, watching her grandson's wife attempt to twist it into a personal brand. Imagine the heartbreak of realising that Harry, her beloved grandson, was siding with Meghan over the very family that had raised him and over the institution that had defined them both. The Queen did not lash out in anger. She tried diplomacy first. She extended kindness to Meghan in those early days. She invited her to private gatherings, took her under her wing, offered gentle guidance from her decades of unmatched experience. But Meghan was not seeking guidance. She was seeking power. And then came the moment insiders still point to as a defining one. During an early discussion about royal duties and protocol, Meghan allegedly snapped, "I don't work for you." Let that sink in. Those words directed at the Queen of England, the monarch who embodied not just Britain, but the entire Commonwealth. "I don't work for you." It was not simply arrogance, it was open defiance. And for many within the palace, it was the moment they realised the fairy tale was over. It was the beginning of the end. Harry, caught between the steadfast devotion of his grandmother and the relentless pull of his wife, chose Meghan once again. He defended her with unwavering loyalty, insisting that they deserved flexibility that the monarchy needed to evolve and adapt to modern times. In his mind, he believed he was fighting for fairness. But in truth, every argument he made, every stand he took, was tugging at the very fabric of the institution his grandmother had spent her entire life stitching together with patience, sacrifice, and duty. And this is where the manipulation reveals itself most clearly. Meghan carefully positioned herself as the victim, the outsider, the misunderstood woman, crushed under the weight of an outdated and unyielding system. She framed the Queen not as a mentor or guide, but as an obstacle, someone standing in the way of progress. And Harry, still haunted by the memory of his mother's mistreatment by both the press and the palace, stepped directly into the trap. To him, Meghan became another Diana, another vulnerable woman being suffocated by the machinery of the monarchy. And Harry swore with all his heart that he would not let history repeat itself. But here lies the brutal contradiction. Diana, for all her struggles and heartbreak, never sought to dismantle the monarchy. She suffered within its walls, yes, but she still understood its weight and its importance. Meghan, however, did not want to endure it. She wanted to bend it, reshape it, remake it according to her will, and that difference changes everything. By the close of 2019, the tension could no longer be contained. The Queen summoned Harry to Sandringham for urgent crisis talks. William was present. Charles was present. Meghan, already in Canada, phoned in to join the discussion. On the table was the proposal that had ignited the storm. Meghan and Harry would step back from full-time royal duties, but they would still retain their titles, still represent the monarchy when it suited them, and still pursue private profits and commercial ventures on the side. The Queen's response was firm and unshakable. There would be no half in, half out. The monarchy could not survive in shades of grey. There was service or there was not. It was that simple. To Meghan, this answer was rejection. To Harry, it felt like betrayal. He believed the Queen should have bent the rules for him. He believed that his devotion to Meghan should have been enough to rewrite centuries of tradition. But to Elizabeth, duty always came first. Before personal ambition, before private gain, even before love. Especially before love. So what happened next? Harry and Meghan stormed forward regardless. They went public, announcing their departure without warning the palace. They posted their carefully crafted plans on Instagram, framing it as their decision, their right, their freedom. The Queen, the monarchy, the British public, everyone was blindsided. And in that single post, the fairy tale ended. It was no longer negotiation. It was no longer compromise. It was unmistakably a declaration of war. And here is where the irony becomes almost unbearable. Meghan, who so often claimed she longed for privacy, orchestrated one of the most public and dramatic exits in the history of the royal family. Meghan, who insisted she did not care for fame, ensured that their announcement dominated headlines across the globe. Meghan, who declared she only wanted peace, set her husband's family into chaos. Does that contradiction not strike you with its clarity? Harry would later admit that the Queen was deeply hurt, that his father was seething with anger, that William was furious beyond words. And yet, even in the face of that storm, Harry still stood by Meghan. He still believed he was doing the right thing. But looking back now, he confesses the truth: it was manipulation. Meghan had pushed him, had framed the decision as an ultimatum, as a stark choice between love and family, between freedom and duty. And Harry, blinded and desperate, chose her. But the Queen, she did not flinch. She did not bend. She issued a statement that was courteous but unwavering. The monarchy would endure. Harry and Meghan would no longer serve as working royals. They could not profit from the crown while claiming to serve it. In that moment, the Queen drew her line in the sand, and with it sealed the reality of their break. But Meghan was not finished. If the Queen would not grant her power within the palace, she would build her empire beyond its walls. And Harry, blinded by his loyalty and devotion to Meghan, was about to make the most devastating choice of his life, because the ultimatum was coming. And when it arrived, it would force Harry to walk away, not only from his family, but from his very identity. So what exactly did Meghan say that night, when the walls seemed to close in, when the Queen had made her final, immovable decision? What ultimatum did she give Harry that pushed him to step into exile? That is the story we now confront. What does it take to make a prince abandon his crown, his country, and his family? What words could possibly sever centuries of tradition and break the heart of a grandmother who had given her entire life to duty? It was not the Queen's decree alone. It was not the unyielding rules of palace protocol. It was not even the crushing weight of history. It was Meghan's ultimatum. Picture this moment. The Sandringham summit had ended. The Queen had spoken with clarity. There would be no half in, half out. Harry could remain a full-time royal upholding service and duty above all else, or he could step down completely. There was no middle ground, no compromise, no bending of the crown's traditions. Harry left the meeting shaken, torn between two worlds. In his heart, he wanted both. He wanted to keep his royal privileges while still giving Meghan the independence she demanded. But reality does not bend so easily. And it was then, in that fragile moment of uncertainty, that Meghan drew her line in the sand. According to insiders, Meghan delivered the words that shattered everything. It's them or me. 4 words. Simple, direct, devastating. 4 words that ripped Harry apart, that forced him into an impossible choice between blood and love, between family and marriage, between the life he was born into and the life he had been promised. Imagine hearing that from the very person you had sworn to love, honour and protect. Imagine the crushing weight pressing down on Harry's chest. If he chose the monarchy, he would lose Meghan. If he chose Meghan, he would lose the monarchy. But Meghan did not frame this as a mere choice. She cloaked it in survival. She told Harry that the palace was against her, that his family was cold, dismissive, even racist. She painted herself as the victim of an ancient institution unwilling to change. And Harry, haunted by the ghost of Diana, believed her. He remembered how his mother had been hounded by the press, abandoned by the palace, broken by the relentless pressure. Now, Meghan was whispering that same history was repeating itself, and that only Harry could stop it. Do you see the power in that manipulation? Meghan was not simply asking Harry to choose her. She was demanding that he save her. And Harry, desperate not to fail another woman he loved, did exactly that. He went to the Queen. He went to Charles. He went to William. And he told them he was leaving. But let us not soften what that meant. It meant turning his back on royal duty. It meant surrendering the military roles he had cherished and worn with pride. It meant abandoning the charities he had dedicated years to building. It meant leaving behind the very country he had sworn to serve. And perhaps most painful of all, it meant breaking his grandmother's heart. Reports suggest that when Harry finally gathered the courage to tell the Queen his decision, her response was remarkably brief. She did not shout. She did not plead. She did not lash out in anger. Instead, she simply said, "I am very disappointed." Think about the weight of those words. Not furious, not outraged, disappointed. And in many ways, that was the deepest wound of all. Yet even then, Harry did not turn back. Meghan's ultimatum had cornered him, and he chose her. Soon after, the couple packed their bags, left Frogmore Cottage behind, and fled to Canada. But only a few short months later, they moved again, this time to California, the beating heart of Hollywood, the very place Meghan had always envisioned. And doesn't that raise the inevitable question? Was this really about safety and freedom, as they claimed? Or was it about positioning themselves at the centre of the entertainment world where celebrity and influence reign supreme? Because what followed was not privacy. It was not a quiet family life. It was not retreat from the spotlight. It was the unveiling of a brand, a carefully constructed platform designed for global attention. And here lies the bitter irony. Meghan got exactly what she wanted. Hollywood independence, lucrative deals. But Harry, he lost everything. His identity, his role, his family, his home. And yet, even as the walls of his old life crumbled around him, he convinced himself it was worth it. He told himself he was protecting Meghan, that he was saving his wife, that this path was the only way forward. But beneath the surface, something else was beginning to stir. A seed of regret was quietly being planted deep inside Harry. Because once you walk away from 1,000 years of history, you cannot simply turn around and walk back. And Harry would soon find himself questioning whether Meghan's ultimatum had truly been about love or whether it had always been about ambition. Now, pause for a moment and reflect. Have you ever faced a choice where neither option felt right, where no matter which path you took, something precious would be lost forever? That was the trap Harry found himself in. But unlike most of us, his choice did not affect only his own life. His choice shook the monarchy, splashed across global headlines, and altered the course of history. And all of it traced back to 4 devastating words, whispered in the dark: "It's them or me." But here comes the twist. Meghan did not stop once the exit was secured. Leaving the palace was only the first step. She doubled down. She was not content to simply walk away from the monarchy. She wanted to rewrite the story itself, casting herself in the role of heroine and the royal family as villains. And Harry, still clutching the belief that he was protecting her, followed her lead without hesitation. This is where the Oprah interview comes in. This was the moment Meghan's Hollywood strategy truly revealed itself. This was where the couple shifted from being victims of the crown to global celebrities selling their story as the product itself. But what did Meghan reveal on that stage? And how did it bind Harry even more tightly into a life of regret? The answer is shocking, and it begins with a single primetime conversation that not even the Queen herself could control. But what Meghan said that night ignited a storm that shook the monarchy to its very core. And Harry, he would only realise too late that he had been swept into a game far larger and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Do you remember that night? The night the world stopped to listen. The moment Oprah leaned in, eyebrows arched, and asked the question everyone had been waiting for. That interview was not just television, it was a cultural earthquake. And for Harry, it was the point of no return. Let us go back. It was the 7th of March, 2021. Millions of viewers across the globe tuned in. The backdrop, a lavish California garden. The atmosphere casual, yet unmistakably staged. Meghan sat poised, in black and white, heavily pregnant, with their second child, styled to perfection, framed like an icon, ready to deliver the performance of her life. Beside her sat Harry, less polished, visibly tense his expression, betraying uncertainty, as though he did not know whether he was there as an equal participant or simply a supporting prop. From the very first moment, Meghan commanded the spotlight. She did not merely answer questions, she crafted a narrative. A story where she was the misunderstood outsider, the victim, the woman who thought she had stepped into a fairy tale, only to find herself trapped in a nightmare. And Oprah played her part flawlessly, sympathetic, shocked, guiding the audience to feel outrage, to see Meghan not just as a duchess, but as a wronged heroine. The bombshells came one after another, each more explosive than the last. First, Meghan claimed she had been silenced, that the palace had muzzled her, forbidding her from speaking freely, stripping her of her own voice. She painted herself as trapped, controlled, unable to share her truth. But pause for a moment, do you see the irony? The woman who insisted she had no voice was now speaking on one of the largest stages in the world, her words amplified to millions across continents. Then came the allegation that detonated like a grenade. Meghan claimed that someone inside the royal family had raised concerns about the colour of Archie's skin before he was even born. It was an accusation so shocking it sent tremors through Buckingham Palace, through Britain, and through every newsroom on the planet. Oprah's reaction, the wide eyes, the sharp intake of breath, the incredulous "what who" became instantly iconic. But Meghan did not give a name. She let it hang in the air like a storm cloud, leaving the world to speculate. Was it Charles? Was it William? Was it even the Queen herself? The ambiguity was not an accident, it was the weapon. By refusing to clarify, Meghan guaranteed that suspicion would swirl endlessly, that the shadow of racism would taint the entire family, regardless of who had or had not spoken those words. Then came the revelation that struck at the most personal level, her mental health. Meghan claimed she had felt suicidal, that the weight of palace life had driven her to despair, and that when she begged the institution for help, she was denied support. It was raw, emotional, devastating. The kind of confession designed to pierce through politics and protocol, reaching straight into the heart of every viewer. And in that moment, it worked. The audience felt the pain. The sympathy poured in. Yet almost immediately, critics pointed out the contradictions. How could she insist she had no access to help when she was one of the most connected women on the planet, surrounded by resources, contacts, and influence? Why not pick up the phone and call a doctor, a therapist, or even a trusted friend? But in the heat of that broadcast, none of it mattered. The story had landed. The impact was real. And then came the coup de grace. Meghan declared that she and Harry had secretly married in a private backyard ceremony days before the royal wedding. She described it as intimate, quiet, just the two of us and the Archbishop of Canterbury. Romantic, yes, but entirely false. The Archbishop himself later confirmed that such a ceremony had never taken place and legally could not have taken place. Still, by the time the truth emerged, the image Meghan had painted a secret, sacred union away from the cameras was already seared into the public imagination. So, what about Harry? When he finally stepped into the spotlight of that interview, his body language revealed more than his words ever could. He sat angled toward Meghan, nodding along, reinforcing every claim she made. When the racial allegation came up, he carefully dodged specifics. When pressed about his family, he confessed that he had felt trapped in royal life, and went further, declaring that his father and his brother were trapped as well. Do you hear the weight of that? He wasn't simply distancing himself from the crown, he was condemning his own blood. And yet, beneath the surface, Harry seemed conflicted. His answers were shorter, less rehearsed, less polished than Meghan's sweeping narratives. At moments, he appeared uneasy, shifting in his seat, especially when Meghan spoke at length. It was as if he recognised the magnitude of the damage being done in real time, but could not or would not stop it. Almost as if Meghan's truth had become their truth, whether Harry fully believed it or not. But the world did not pause to study Harry's hesitation. The headlines erupted instantly. Meghan's claims dominated the front pages for weeks. Politicians weighed in. Celebrities rushed to offer support. Social media exploded with hashtags and outrage. Suddenly the monarchy itself was on trial. And Meghan, calm, composed, commanding, was the star witness at the centre of it all. Yet here's the twist. In Britain, public opinion turned sharply and not in Meghan's favour. Polls showed support for the Sussexes collapsing, especially among older generations who saw the interview as nothing less than betrayal. To many, it felt like an attack not only on the monarchy as an institution, but on the Queen herself, who, at that very moment, was quietly grieving the failing health of Prince Philip. Across the Atlantic, however, the response was the opposite. In America, Meghan's stock soared. She was embraced as a cultural heroine, celebrated as a woman of colour, standing up to what was portrayed as a cold and oppressive monarchy. Hollywood rallied to her side, and soon lucrative deals began to roll in Netflix, Spotify book contracts. Do you see the pattern? The Oprah interview was not simply a confession, it was a launchpad, a carefully timed debut for Meghan and Harry's new life as global celebrities. Their story was no longer just a narrative. It was their product, and now they were selling it. But here is the question Harry would wrestle with in the months that followed. Was that night truly about telling the truth, or was it about building a brand because soon cracks began to appear? Timelines did not align. Key claims were disputed. The palace, though measured and restrained, pushed back with quiet firmness, and Harry began to feel the weight of what had been unleashed. The fallout was not only damaging the monarchy, it was cutting him off from the family he still deep down loved. But by then, it was too late. The world had already heard Meghan's version of events, and Harry had sat beside her on global television, nodding, validating, endorsing it all. There was no undoing it, no way to step back, no path to reclaim what had been lost. And then came the next chapter, a royal funeral. Prince Philip's final farewell, Harry's first return to Britain after the bombshell interview. But how would his family receive him? With cold shoulders, with open arms, with silent fury. Even Harry himself could not predict what awaited him, and the truth of that reunion shocked him more than he could have imagined. It would also mark the beginning of his creeping regret, because what unfolded at Philip's funeral was not merely awkward, it was devastating. It was a reckoning Harry could not escape. For the first time, he was forced to confront the question he had avoided for so long. Had Meghan led him into exile, only for him to lose everything in the process? Grief has a way of cutting through noise, of stripping away everything but what truly matters. At a funeral, grudges often fade rivalries, soften families, set aside differences, if only for a single moment of unity. But not this time. Not for Harry. Prince Philip's funeral in April of 2021 was meant to be a solemn farewell to the Queen's husband, the man who had stood at her side for more than 70 years. But for Harry, it became something far more than a moment of mourning. It became a test. His first time standing face to face with his family since the Oprah interview. His first return to Windsor after detonating the bomb that had shaken the monarchy to its core. His first chance to look his father and his brother in the eye, and reckon with the damage that had been done. So what happened when Harry walked back into the fold? Let us set the scene. The world was still reeling from Meghan and Harry's televised accusations. The Queen, now widowed, was grieving the loss of her partner of a lifetime. William and Charles were still burning with quiet fury at what they saw as betrayal. And Harry arrived alone. Meghan had stayed behind in California, citing pregnancy and doctor's orders. Some said she wished to avoid the confrontation. Others whispered that she feared the British press would tear her apart if she appeared. But whatever the reason, it meant that Harry stepped into the lion's den without her alone, exposed and painfully vulnerable. From the moment Harry set foot at Windsor Castle, the tension hung thick in the air. The cameras captured everything, each glance, each gesture, each subtle movement. During the solemn procession, Harry was positioned apart from William, walking a few paces behind. It may have been protocol or perhaps symbolism, a deliberate reminder that he was no longer part of the inner circle. And then there was the silence, heavy, unbroken, suffocating. Imagine it walking behind your grandfather's coffin, in front of millions, watching around the world, knowing that every eye is not just on the ceremony, but on your fractured family. Knowing your brother's jaw is set tight, your father's gaze cold, your grandmother's expression unreadable. Knowing that half the world is quietly hoping for reconciliation, while the other half is revelling in your downfall. After the service, Harry made an effort to bridge the divide. The cameras caught him walking alongside William and Kate, exchanging a few words as they left St. George's Chapel. For a fleeting moment, hope seemed to flicker. Could this be the olive branch? Could grief pull them back together? But insiders tell a very different story. Behind the scenes, the conversations were brief, stilted and guarded. William was still furious. Charles was deeply hurt. Neither trusted Harry anymore. Not after Oprah. Not after the accusations that had painted the family as cold, indifferent, even racist. One insider put it in the bluntest terms: they didn't know if Harry had returned to mourn his grandfather or to gather more material for Netflix. Can you imagine that? To be seen not as a son or a brother, but as a potential liability. A man who might take private words spoken in grief and turn them into public ammunition. Harry himself would later admit that those days were deeply uncomfortable, that he felt like an outsider in the only world he had ever known. He spoke of awkward meals, conversations that went nowhere, silences that stretched endlessly. His brother kept his distance. His father seemed detached, unwilling to engage. The Queen, ever composed, was kind but firm, focusing on duty rather than reconciliation. And yet, beneath the frost, Harry felt something else stirring regret. Because funerals strip life down to its essence. They remind us that time is finite, that chances to make things right do not last forever. As Harry stood watching his grandmother sit alone in the chapel, her gaze fixed on the coffin of the man who had stood beside her for more than 70 years, something inside him cracked. This emptiness, this isolation was the cost of his choice. He had stood by Meghan in California, but now he stood apart from his family in Windsor. And the cruel irony, Meghan, who had called the monarchy toxic, was not there to see the human side of it, the grief, the tradition, the unity that emerges in loss. She was far away in sunny Montecito, while Harry drowned in the cold silence of Windsor Castle. Doesn't that contradiction strike you? Harry had sacrificed everything for Meghan, his role, his family, his home, even his honour. And yet, in the darkest moment of his family's life, she was not at his side. It was here, in the silence of Windsor, and the loneliness of grief, that the seed of doubt first began to sprout. Questions he had buried for years suddenly rose to the surface. Was Meghan truly protecting him, or was she isolating him? Was this about love, or was it about control? But those doubts could not undo the damage. When Harry boarded the plane back to California, the distance between him and his family was greater than ever before. And when he landed in Montecito, Meghan was waiting, not with tears of comfort, but with plans, with deals, with strategies and opportunities. To her, the Oprah interview was not betrayal, it was leverage. To her, the funeral was not family, it was optics. And Harry, standing in the middle of it all, began to feel the sharp truth. The life he had abandoned, flawed, complicated, restrictive, was still the life where he truly belonged. But Meghan's eyes were already fixed on something bigger. Hollywood was calling. Streaming giants were offering millions. The brand of Harry and Meghan was hotter than ever, and Meghan had no intention of slowing down. The question now was, how far would she push Harry into this new world? And how much more would he have to lose before he finally realised he had been manipulated? The answer lies in what came next, their multi-million-dollar Netflix deal. A deal that promised fame, fortune and freedom, but delivered instead cracks, conflict, humiliation, and Harry's regrets. They were only just beginning to deepen. When you hear the word freedom, what comes to mind? For most, it conjures peace, privacy, a quiet life away from the endless noise. For Harry, freedom meant escape, an escape from the palace machine, from duty, from scrutiny. But for Meghan, freedom meant something entirely different. Freedom meant Hollywood. It meant cameras, contracts, red carpets, and a spotlight brighter than even the monarchy could ever provide. Let's rewind to 2020. Harry and Meghan had just fled the United Kingdom. Their departure was packaged as a search for normalcy. They said they wanted to step back from royal duties, to raise their children privately, to live quietly and simply. But how quickly did that story collapse? Within mere months, the narrative of retreat gave way to the reality of profit. Deals worth tens of millions were signed. Netflix, Spotify, Penguin Random House. The primetime sit-down with Oprah. Glossy magazine spreads. Meghan's children's book, Harry's memoir, Privacy. No, this was monetization on a global scale. Now imagine Harry's state of mind. He had surrendered his military honours, symbols of service and sacrifice he cherished. He had walked away from his royal roles, the duties that had given him identity and purpose. He had fractured his relationships with his brother, his father, and even his grandmother. And what was all of it? Traded for corporate deals, media contracts, Hollywood handshakes. And Meghan, she thrived in it. She understood the business because she had always been in it. For her, this was not alien, it was familiar. She knew how to pitch, how to charm executives, how to craft and sell a personal brand. Meghan was in her element. She was home. Harry, however, was not. But Harry, he was a soldier, a prince, a man raised in the language of duty, not scripts, of honour, not brand building. Thrust into Meghan's world of media and contracts, he was out of his depth, and it showed. Take the much-hyped Netflix deal, reportedly worth $100 million. The promise was grand documentaries, children's programming, scripted series, innovative projects with global impact. The reality years passed, and the only significant product to emerge was Harry and Meghan, the docuseries released in December of 2022. And what was that series? It was not a story of global change. It was not educational, charitable, or groundbreaking. It was 6 hours of Harry and Meghan retelling their grievances, casting themselves as victims of the crown, hounded by the press, misunderstood visionaries building a new world. Audiences tuned in, yes, but the reviews were merciless. Critics branded it self-indulgent, repetitive, a pity party dressed up as a documentary. Even sympathetic commentators admitted it offered nothing new, merely the same familiar complaints repackaged for streaming. And here is the sting. Harry's family watched too. Imagine the Queen frail in her final years, hearing her grandson once again disparage the monarchy, this time broadcast globally on a commercial platform. Imagine William watching private conversations repurposed as content. Imagine Charles realising that his own son had turned family into Netflix material. The betrayal was not whispered this time. It was streamed, archived, and sold. But Meghan didn't mind. She saw numbers climbing headlines, multiplying her face on posters, her name trending worldwide. To her, this was success, proof that the gamble had paid off. But to Harry, it was something else entirely. Another fracture, another step further away from the world he once belonged to. Another reminder that his sacrifice was being monetized rather than honoured. And then came Spotify, a deal reportedly worth $20 million. Meghan launched her podcast Archetypes, a glossy, high-production series featuring big-name guests and polished narratives. Harry appeared occasionally, but he never seemed comfortable. His voice lacked conviction. His presence felt awkward. Spotify executives eventually grew frustrated, and when the deal collapsed, one insider dismissed the couple as grifters. Do you see the irony? The couple who fled Britain for the promise of financial independence now found themselves losing credibility in the very industry they had staked their future upon. Yet, through it all, Meghan pressed forward, undeterred. Every setback she reframed as a learning curve, every criticism she brushed aside as jealousy, every collapse she recast as an opportunity to pivot. But Harry, he was wilting. In private interviews, he admitted life in America was more difficult than he had expected. He confessed he missed aspects of his military service, the structure, the purpose. He even admitted quietly that he missed home. And that was when the cracks between them began to show. Friends whispered that Harry seemed restless, uneasy, like a man trying to wear a life that didn't quite fit. He struggled to adapt to Meghan's fast-paced Hollywood rhythm. He was no longer the centre of gravity Meghan was. She thrived in that world, effortlessly commanding attention, slipping into the spotlight as though it were her natural habitat. And Harry, he was no longer the star, but the accessory. Think about that dynamic. Harry, once a global icon in his own right, reduced to the +1 on red carpets. Harry, the soldier prince who had flown combat missions in Afghanistan, now photographed carrying Meghan's handbag at glittering galas. Harry, who had stood with comrades in war, now sitting awkwardly in Los Angeles boardrooms, out of place, out of depth. Doesn't it feel like a man misplaced in his own story? And yet here lies the contradiction. Every time Harry showed doubt, every time he faltered or questioned, Meghan was ready with the refrain, "We left because of them. We're here because of us. Don't forget what they did." It was subtle, it was constant, it was conditioning. The palace was always cast as the enemy. The press was always the villain. Meghan was always the victim. And Harry, he was her shield, her defender, her protector, no matter the cost. And so, Harry stayed the course. He kept filming, kept promoting, kept defending Meghan's vision. Even as the cracks widened, even as the criticism grew louder, even as the weight of regret pressed harder, he pressed on. But behind the cameras, behind the glossy contracts and red carpet smiles, one question gnawed at him endlessly: was he truly free? Because Hollywood, like the palace, has its own crown, its own chains, its own ruthless rules. Meghan understood those rules instinctively. Harry, however, was only just beginning to recognise them, and the more he saw, the clearer it became. Maybe he hadn't escaped at all. Maybe he had simply traded one gilded cage for another. But what Meghan did next pushed his doubts even deeper. Because Hollywood was never just about money. It was about image, about prestige, about status. And when Meghan began reaching for the ultimate status symbol, political influence, Harry suddenly found himself dragged into a world even more cutthroat, even more unforgiving than the monarchy he had left behind. And in that moment, the realization hit him hard. If Meghan's eyes were fixed on fame and power, then where did that leave their family? Where did that leave him? Power. It has always been the currency Meghan Markle understood best. Hollywood fame may have been the entry point, but it was never the end game. What Meghan truly sought was influence. And in America, influence often means politics. Let's set the stage. By the year 2021, Meghan and Harry were firmly rooted in Montecito. The deals were secured. Netflix cameras were rolling. The podcast had launched. The brand was humming. But Meghan wasn't satisfied. Celebrity was not enough. She wanted something larger, something lasting. She wanted to shape conversations, to dictate narratives, to stand on the global stage, not merely as an actress or a duchess, but as a leader. And so she began testing the waters. Letters to Congress calling for paid parental leave. Phone calls to United States senators lobbying them directly for policy changes. Public essays tackling issues of race, gender and equality. Each step carefully designed not just to add her voice to debate, but to position her as an authority, a figure the media could no longer frame as just a former actress or a royal exile, but as a political player in her own right. Do you notice the transformation? Meghan was no longer presenting herself as the silenced outsider or the misunderstood duchess. This was Meghan stepping into a new role, the campaigner, the would-be stateswoman, preparing her stage. Whispers began to circulate among insiders that her ambitions stretched far beyond Hollywood contracts or philanthropic projects. Some said she envisioned a future in elected office, not merely as a senator, but possibly something even greater. A few voices even speculated about the White House itself. It may have sounded far-fetched, almost unbelievable. Yet, when you looked closely at the move she was making, the strategy was clear. Meghan was deliberately leveraging her royal title to give her words an air of gravitas. She was drawing on American celebrity culture to maintain visibility and influence. She was positioning herself as a progressive voice of the modern era, a champion for causes of race, gender and equality that resonated with younger voters and the global stage alike. But here lies the great tension. Harry had never signed up for this path. He was raised under the strict discipline of monarchy, where every royal is expected to remain neutral, where politics are avoided at all costs. From the earliest days of his childhood, Harry was trained never to take sides, never to enter partisan battles, never to risk dividing the people he was meant to represent. And yet, now, against the grain of all that upbringing, he found himself being pulled into a brand new arena. It was a battlefield of ideology and influence, one he did not understand, one that carried dangers even greater than the British press he so despised. For Meghan, this was opportunity. For Harry, it was a threat. A world that could strip away the last fragile threads of royal credibility he still possessed. Picture Harry seated in Montecito, watching Meghan confidently place calls to senators on her phone. She was not pausing to ask permission. She was not slowing down to seek guidance or weigh the risks. She was simply charging forward with determination, her eyes fixed on the horizon of influence. And Harry once again was swept along in her momentum. Yet, the more Meghan immersed herself in the world of politics, the more Harry began to feel like a bystander in his own life. Here lies the piercing contradiction. Harry had sacrificed everything that defined him, his royal family, his ancestral home, his cherished military roles, all under the banner of protecting and supporting Meghan. But now Meghan was chasing a kind of power that did not include him at the centre. He was no longer the focus, no longer the driving force. He had become the supporting act, the man in the background. And that realisation cut deep. Those closest to the couple began to notice subtle but undeniable cracks in their facade. Friends whispered that Harry appeared restless, increasingly isolated, and unmistakably homesick. He longed for Britain, for the structure of his old life. He missed the camaraderie of the military, the sense of purpose and brotherhood that no Hollywood contract could replace. He missed his brother, despite the chasm between them. Meanwhile, Meghan was thriving in the spotlight, commanding stages, commanding rooms, using every opportunity to lift her profile higher. Consider one telling moment, her appearance at a high-profile United Nations event. Meghan spoke with polished confidence, her voice steady, her presence commanding, her tone brimming with power and gravitas. She owned the stage as though it had always been hers. And Harry He sat dutifully beside her, clapping, when it was appropriate, smiling at the right moments. But his body language betrayed him. To those who looked closely, he seemed less a partner and more a shadow. Meghan was radiant, utterly in her element. Harry looked like a man quietly asking himself the most painful question of all. How did I end up here? Doesn't it feel as though the roles had been reversed completely? Harry, once the prince who symbolised rebellion, charisma and individuality, now reduced to playing second fiddle to Meghan, the actress who had transformed herself into an activist and a political voice. And here lies the bitter irony. Harry had left the monarchy because he felt suffocated. He said he craved freedom. He wanted to break away from the weight of tradition, from the relentless comparison to his brother William, from the destiny of being the eternal spare. Yet, what had he truly found? He had escaped one shadow only to step directly into another Meghan's. And while Meghan's ambitions climbed higher with each passing day, Harry's regrets dug deeper into his soul. Because every political step Meghan took widened the gulf between Harry and his family. Royals are bound by an unspoken rule: they do not dabble in politics. They do not endorse candidates. They do not lobby lawmakers. Their purpose is to remain above the fray, a symbol of unity rather than division. And yet here was Meghan using her Duchess title to write letters to Congress, to make calls to senators, to position herself as a force in American politics. The palace took note. The press pounced. Critics accused her of exploiting her royal connection for personal gain, for building a political brand. And Harry He was caught squarely in the middle. Once more he found himself forced to defend Meghan, even in moments when deep down he wasn't certain he agreed with her at all. Think about the toll that must take on a man. Each time Harry admitted he missed Britain, Meghan reminded him coldly, "They don't want us back." Each time he dared to question her strategy, she countered with, "We're building something bigger than them." Each time he hesitated, she reframed it as weakness, as fear, as disloyalty to their shared mission. And Harry, still haunted by the memory of losing his mother, and still terrified of losing Meghan, swallowed his doubts and stayed silent. But silence, as we know, has a cost. And for Harry, that cost was the slow erosion of his own identity. But silence does not erase regret. Silence does not mend wounds. Silence does not restore the family that has been lost. And for Harry, that silence grew heavier with every passing day. The truth gnawed at him relentlessly. He began to see what had been hidden in plain sight all along. Meghan was not carefully building a family-centred life of stability and peace. She was constructing an empire. Hollywood politics, influence, and power, those were her priorities. And where did that leave Harry? He was the man who had turned his back on duty, the man who had severed bonds with his brother and father, the man who had traded centuries of tradition and the honour of his crown for contracts and celebrity. And slowly, painfully, the realisation crept in. He was not Meghan's equal partner in power. He was her pawn, a supporting character in the drama she was writing for herself. The moment that crystallised this devastating truth came not with a deal or a red carpet, but with a book. His book, Spare. When it finally hit the shelves, the fallout was far more brutal than he could ever have anticipated. It was meant to be his redemption, his opportunity to reclaim his voice, to set the record straight, to share his truth in his own words. But instead, it turned into another weapon, another humiliation, another glaring reminder that he had been persuaded, even manipulated, into turning his grief and his family history into content for the world to consume. And once those pages were printed, Once the headlines dissected every confession, every intimate detail, there was no taking it back. The bridges were not just burned, they were reduced to ashes. And Harry, staring at the wreckage, could no longer deny the cost of his choices. Confession. It is supposed to bring release, to set the soul free from its burdens. That is what Harry was told. That is what he desperately wanted to believe. Tell your truth, Meghan urged him. The world needs to hear it. You have been silenced long enough. And so Harry sat down and he wrote. The memoir Spare was presented to the world as raw, unfiltered, devastatingly honest. It was pitched as Harry's opportunity to finally break away from palace control, to put forward his side of the story without the edits of courtiers or the careful spin of royal press officers. It was meant to be his truth in his own words, uncensored and unashamed. But here is the cruel irony. In his attempt to free himself, he chained himself tighter than ever before. Let us step back for a moment. The publishing deal itself was staggering, reportedly worth $20 million. Penguin Random House was not merely purchasing a memoir, they were purchasing scandal. They were paying for the rawest of details, the sharpest confessions, the revelations that would light up front pages and dominate news cycles. And Meghan, she encouraged him every step of the way. Be bold, do not hold back, they will never change unless you expose them, she told him. So Harry dug deeper than anyone imagined he would. He wrote about William, about Charles, about Camilla, even about the Queen. He put on paper the fights, the tears, the arguments, the betrayals, and still he did not stop. He pushed further into territory no royal had ever dared tread. He revealed that he had killed 25 Taliban fighters during his service in Afghanistan. He recounted losing his virginity behind a pub to an older woman. He admitted to cocaine, to psychedelic mushrooms, to wild nights of reckless abandon. He even mocked William's thinning hair, a detail so petty it shocked even his supporters. What was promised as liberation instead became a spectacle, and what was supposed to heal only deepened the wounds. Now let me put a question before you. Was any of it truly necessary? Was there a genuine need to drag his brother's hairline into the glare of the spotlight? Was there any purpose in sharing details so intimate that they humiliated his own family? Or was it all performance? Because, make no mistake, every single page of Spare was crafted to sell, to shop, to trend. And Harry, once the cheeky yet beloved prince of the people, transformed into something else entirely. He became a caricature of himself, a man spilling private secrets, not in the name of healing, but in the pursuit of headlines. The press feasted on it. Social media erupted in ridicule, memes and mockery, and the royal family, as tradition dictated, said nothing. But silence should never be mistaken for forgiveness. Behind palace walls, insiders reported that William was incandescent with rage. Charles was heartbroken. Camilla, whom Harry branded as dangerous and accused of sacrificing others to polish her own public image, was said to be livid. And the Queen, frail and in the twilight of her reign, found the entire spectacle deeply distressing. And Harry himself, did he feel the catharsis he had been promised? Did he experience relief, vindication, or even the faintest sense of freedom? The answer was no. What he felt was regret, crushing, inescapable regret. Because once the ink was dry, once the book sat on shelves around the globe, there was no clawing it back, no softening the words, no chance of repairing the bridges he had reduced to ashes. The damage was permanent, and Harry knew it. Even worse, Harry began to see the truth of how he had been used. Think about it carefully. The memoir was never truly Harry's idea. It was Meghan who pushed for it. Meghan who told him his story was valuable. Meghan who framed it as an act of empowerment, and who ultimately stood to benefit from the chaos it unleashed Meghan. Because while Harry absorbed the backlash, Meghan carefully positioned herself as the supportive wife, the innocent bystander. This is Harry's story, she would say. This is his truth. Clever, wasn't it? But in reality, it only bound him tighter to her. He had exposed his family in ways no one could forgive. He had humiliated his brother. He had alienated his father. He had taken aim at his stepmother. And now, with the world watching, how could he ever return? And here is the cruel twist. The very audience Harry thought would finally understand him, the public turned on him instead. Late-night hosts twisted his confessions into endless punchlines. Social media reduced him to memes. The same world that once admired Harry for his service, his humour, his relatability, now saw him as bitter, whiny, entitled, and astonishingly out of touch. So, was this truly the freedom he had longed for? Or was it the cage Meghan had built around him? A cage of overexposure, humiliation, and unrelenting regret. And the toll was staggering. Friends close to Harry whispered that he had become more withdrawn, more suspicious, more consumed by the weight of public opinion. Every cruel joke cut him deeper, every mocking headline stung sharper, and every cold silence from his family was a brutal reminder that reconciliation was slipping further and further out of reach, perhaps forever. Meanwhile, Meghan pressed forward without hesitation. Hollywood meetings filled her calendar. Political ambitions crept further into the spotlight. Strategic interviews kept her name circulating. To her, the memoir was nothing more than another chapter in the ongoing brand, another tool to expand her influence and visibility. But Harry, he began to see it through a different lens. The fog was lifting. He started to recognise the manipulation, the way his anger, his grief, his deepest traumas had been mined and weaponised. Not to heal him, not to bring him peace, but to feed the machine that surrounded Meghan's ambitions. And that dawning realisation planted a dangerous thought in his mind, one that gnawed at him relentlessly. What if Meghan did not truly love him for who he was, but for what he represented? What if he had never been her partner in destiny, but merely her stepping stone? A prince she could use, a crown she could borrow, a platform she could climb to, reach her own empire. The question haunted him, and for the first time, Harry dared to wonder if love had been the illusion all along.